Hello, everybody. My name is Stefan, and welcome to my channel. I'm someone who's been intensely interested in the Bitcoin space for a few years now. It's something which I'm very passionate about and have studied for hundreds, if not thousands of hours. So what I want to do, my goal with this channel is to kind of create a channel where I can distill what I've learned in the past few years and break it down into easy to understand videos where anybody can come in, learn about Bitcoin, and leave with a better understanding of how it works and the different aspects of it. In today's video, what I want to do is I want to talk broadly about Bitcoin and what Bitcoin is. We will start with a brief history on Bitcoin, and then we will cover in broad scopes how the technology works. So let's start with a history of Bitcoin. Bitcoin was invented in 2008 by an anonymous individual or group using the pseudonym Satoshi Nakamoto. To this day, we have no idea who Satoshi is, if they're a group of people, a single person, and their identity has not been revealed to the public since Bitcoin's inception in 2008. Now, what Satoshi did in 2008 is he released a white paper onto an obscure mailing list on the internet titled Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. And what Satoshi did in this paper is he laid out a decentralized peer-to-peer electronic cash system where users could transact with each other on a peer-to-peer network and send value to each other without the need for a centralized party or third-party intermediary. Now, of course, this had been something that people had been trying to do for a while, right? It was 2008, so there was already a lot of developments on the internet, and creating some form of eCash that actually worked had been something that people had been trying for a while. But the biggest reason that people failed is because they hadn't solved this fundamental problem in computer science called the Byzantine's general problem. Now, essentially what the Byzantine's general problem looks to solve is how can a decentralized network can achieve consensus without a controlling authority. And this is something that hadn't been solved. A lot of people kind of racked their brains on it. And then you have this guy, Satoshi Nakamoto, who comes in and says, "Hey guys, I solved this problem." So you can imagine when he released it, it was met with a lot of skepticism. A lot of people didn't believe that he did and kind of just scoffed at it and laughed, right? Like, yeah, sure, you solved this, sure, Satoshi. And so he releases his paper, and for a few months kind of goes dark, right? There's no, the Bitcoin software doesn't get released until January of 2009, about 3 months later, when the Genesis block of Bitcoin is mined. So Satoshi mines this Genesis block in 2009, and on the block there's an inscription, which is an excerpt from a newspaper called The Times, which says, "Chancellor on the brink of second bailouts for banks." And, this is kind of an ode to why Bitcoin was created in the first place. Take into mind, we were in 2008, 2009 times in the midst of a financial crisis where banks were getting bailed out because of their irresponsible decisions and the actions that they had took, which led to this financial crisis. So in mining this Genesis block, the Bitcoin network is officially launched, right? So now anybody can download the Bitcoin software and operate and play on it themselves. For almost over a year, Bitcoin did not have any monetary value to it. People were able to mine Bitcoin, and in the early days this was predominantly Satoshi. And then in May of 2010, a developer by the name of Laszlo was the first person to ever use Bitcoin to buy a good. And this is known as Bitcoin Pizza Day, because what Laszlo did is he bought 2 Papa John's pizzas for 10,000 Bitcoin. Now, if you think about it this day, right, and the value of 10,000 Bitcoin, you would laugh and say, why would he ever buy Papa John's pizzas for 10,000 Bitcoin? But you have to remember, this was 2010. Bitcoin didn't have a value to it. And so the fact that he was able to do this was a pretty big moment in Bitcoin's history, because it was no longer, this little internet project. It was a way for people to actually buy goods or services and have this currency. Of course, we're now 2023 and a lot has happened since the inception of Bitcoin. We've seen Bitcoin go from no market value to close to 70,000 US dollars, and much more development and actions have taken place in the Bitcoin space. There's a broad history on Bitcoin, which we won't cover everything in this video, but I just wanted to give an overview of how Bitcoin started, right? How did it come into play, and how did this anonymous individual create this currency that would go on to change the world? So now that we've covered that brief introduction in history into what or how Bitcoin was created, let's talk a bit about what Bitcoin is, right? Because Bitcoin is a very complex subject, in my opinion. You know, you can look at it from a bird's eye view and say Bitcoin is digital money. But saying Bitcoin is digital money is almost like saying the internet is a fancy telephone, right? The internet is so much more than a communications method. There's a lot of stuff that you can do with the internet, and similar to Bitcoin, it's more than just a currency. It's a fundamental innovation in our times. And the best way, I think, to kind of look at Bitcoin and how, you know, I would kind of break it down is there's three ways to, there's three main functionalities, I guess, that describe Bitcoin, right? So you have Bitcoin, the application, Bitcoin, the network, and Bitcoin, the currency. Now let's start with Bitcoin, the application. So Bitcoin at its core is software, right? Satoshi was a developer who created a piece of software titled Bitcoin Core. And anybody across the world can download this software called Bitcoin Core and run it themselves. So you can download it on a laptop, you can download it on a desktop, or you can get a specialized device like a Raspberry Pi to download Bitcoin Core. And essentially what you're doing when you're downloading Bitcoin Core is you're downloading the Bitcoin blockchain, right? And a blockchain, I'm sure most of you have heard that term in the past few years. The Bitcoin blockchain is a decentralized ledger which contains a list of all of the transactions that have ever occurred in the Bitcoin network, and is distributed across many different peers across the network who are running this software. So through downloading Bitcoin Core or the Bitcoin software, what you're doing is you are participating in Bitcoin's network and are what is called running a Bitcoin node. That's a term that you'll probably hear quite a bit in the space, but essentially just think about it. When you run Bitcoin Core, when you download the software, you're running a Bitcoin node. Along with the Bitcoin blockchain and the state of all the transactions, you're also downloading the rules and protocols of the Bitcoin network, right? So that's the main way to kind of view it when you're thinking about Bitcoin, the application, is you're downloading the Bitcoin blockchain and the rules and protocols that are attached to Bitcoin's software. So once you have downloaded Bitcoin, you are now an active member in Bitcoin, the network. So what it does when you download Bitcoin Core is it finds other people running this program and creates a random mesh or peer-to-peer network. All of the peers in the network agree to the rules that are laid out by the Bitcoin protocol, and there's no hierarchy in the network, right? So that doesn't mean there's no peer that's above another, and that's a very, very important part of Bitcoin and its value proposition is that there is no hierarchy. It's a peer-to-peer network where everybody has an equal say, and there's not a single entity or centralizing force that controls the Bitcoin network. All of the peers in the network have a copy of this Bitcoin blockchain and communicate to each other on the state of transactions. The more distributed that Bitcoin gets with the amount of nodes running Bitcoin software, the more decentralized and distributed that it becomes. In Bitcoin's network, you also have miners, which are, think of almost like specialized nodes that mine the Bitcoin blocks, right? And mining is a rather complex topic that we will break down in another video. But for right now, just know that the network element of Bitcoin consists of people who are running their own nodes, and then you have Bitcoin miners. And the combination of these two is what creates this decentralized system and allows Bitcoin to operate in a decentralized manner. The more people that run nodes and the more miners that come onto the network, the more decentralized and strong that Bitcoin becomes, right? So in the early days of Bitcoin, when you only had a few miners, because in the early days, the people who were running nodes were also the miners. In the beginning days, Bitcoin was much more susceptible and vulnerable to kind of being captured because it wasn't very highly distributed or robust yet. But now in 2023, the miners and the Bitcoin nodes are incredibly resilient and strong. And this creates a very, very strong foundation to build a monetary network off of. I will also get into another video on how to run your own Bitcoin node. But again, I want to keep this short and to the point while giving you guys a good overview of how things work. So now moving to Bitcoin, the currency, right? So we have the application, which is what Bitcoin Core is. It's the Bitcoin blockchain, as well as the protocols and rules that are in the Bitcoin network. Then you have the network, which is this distributed network of nodes and miners, which make up the Bitcoin peer-to-peer network. And now we have the currency, right? And that's what most people know when they think of Bitcoin, is Bitcoin the currency. And what Bitcoin is, the currency, is it's the native asset that is built on top of the Bitcoin blockchain. You can either buy Bitcoin, mine Bitcoin, or nowadays now you can even earn Bitcoin. When Bitcoin started with the Genesis block in 2009, Satoshi was the primary miner because he was the creator of the network and it wasn't very popular yet at the time. And so anybody really with a laptop and an internet connection could very easily mine Bitcoin. Because Satoshi was the first miner of Bitcoin in the network, he holds and still holds a lot of Bitcoin, which were generated in those early days. But the unique thing is that the Bitcoins which Satoshi holds have not been moved or sold onto the market since they were mined. And that's a really interesting and important point, right? Because we have this anonymous individual who mined the first Bitcoins. And now, the value of those Bitcoins would be astronomical. But whoever this person or group is has not moved it yet. And that's so interesting because it points to a lot of like what the actual case could be, you know. One day those coins may move. We don't know what will happen with those coins because Satoshi's identity remains anonymous. But I think it's very cool almost and unique that to this day those coins have not moved, given how crazy valuable those coins would be if sold on to the open market. So once more and more people started to come onto the network and mine Bitcoin, it became more and more popular. And also because of because of the increased interest on the market, the first exchanges started to pop up, right? And now on these exchanges, people could go and buy Bitcoin for the market price, usually with fees, of course, attached to it as well. But now instead of mining, people could also buy Bitcoin. Since the early days, exchanges have become much more advanced, much more resilient, and much more plentiful, where people now can buy Bitcoin almost anywhere in any country. This has also helped greatly in the mainstream adoption of Bitcoin because now anybody, as I mentioned, can really get access to and buy Bitcoin. On top of buying or mining Bitcoin, people can now also earn Bitcoin. And we're seeing that pop up more and more nowadays where people are accepting Bitcoin in the exchange of goods or services. Now, the biggest thing, of course, to note with Bitcoin, the currency, and the biggest value proposition of Bitcoin's currency is that it has a fixed supply of 21 million Bitcoin. This means that there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin that get mined and put into circulation. Now, the 21 million is a rather arbitrary number, But the most important thing to note is that the supply is fixed, right? So no centralized party can dictate the supply of Bitcoin or inflate it away. This is incredibly valuable in a world where more and more monetary assets seemingly have infinite supply and where it is hard to maintain purchasing power. So that's a quick summary of kind of the history of Bitcoin and what Bitcoin is. Now, it's a very bird's eye view of how Bitcoin works, and I will create more videos diving into specific sections of Bitcoin. But I think the biggest takeaway that I want you to get out of this video is how fundamental of an innovation that Bitcoin really is, right? For the first time in history, we have an asset that is detached from a centralized company, government, whatever you will. There's nobody who's dictating the monetary supply of Bitcoin, and it's not within the control of any of these parties. If you own Bitcoin on your own wallet, nobody can tell you what you can or cannot do with it. And that's the beauty of it, right? We have created this permissionless system where people can instantaneously exchange value with each other all over the world without needing to rely on anybody else. And that's a beautiful thing. So that is what I want you to take away from this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it kind of makes sense a bit. I know it's a very complex topic. It's taken me hours and hours and hours, and still there's a lot that I'm learning. But I really just want to try and distill what I've learned into easy to understand videos. And this is the first one in my attempt of doing so. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I will see you on the next video.